Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bim. How to follow that? It's interesting, actually. I think all of us three speakers have got a very, very similar message, and that gives me a lot of confidence, actually, in the future of the order. I have to say, when I'm thinking about my vision of what the future will look like, it's a little bleak. It might be a little bit depressing. I'm sorry about that. I think it might be a personality tendency anyway, but I suppose what I see when I look at what might happen is that in the future is that we're growing more and more dependent on resources that are finite, oil, water, metals particularly. And looking at the statistics, well, we've definitely passed peak oil production, and though clean energy production is increasing, it's nowhere near the levels that we'd need to take over that oil production. And it can't meet the demand set by modern consumer standards in the West. And other countries are catching up, wanting the same things that we've been so lucky to have. It reminds me of the sutta in the Sutta Nipata, the Attadanda Sutta, where the Buddha said, "Seeing creatures writhing like fish in water too shallow, so hostile to one another, seeing this, I became afraid." And I think in a way the Buddha saw what can happen when a world is competing for scarce resources. Wars, conflict, the rise of nationalism are no accident. They're born of greed and competing for scarce resources. They're born of fear, and they give rise to fear. As the Buddha said, fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. So if I think about the future, I think it will look very similar to the past. Our way of living cannot carry on in the way that it has. It's simply impossible for the world, the environment, to meet those standards. So in this changing world, I think that we need new ways of living and working that bind people into strong communities that can really make a difference. We can't maintain the same living standards, and we will have to live differently, all of us, and we will have to share resources. We cannot rely on the economic model, which is the relentless increase of gross domestic product. And our work will have to reflect the fact that we have less resources and live more in tune with what we actually do have. With an ageing population, as we've been talking about in the order, but generally it's true that with an ageing population, we're going to have more dependence. So we're going to have to work with each other in a different way that supports each other and the world that we live in. So in this new world, governments do have some role to play. They can regulate corporations, help protect the environment, and protect the rights of the individual. But actually, in a global world where communication is instant globally, the traditional role of the government is weakening. We've seen how corporations can work round government rules and often have more power than national governments. And I don't know if this is true worldwide, but I certainly see in the UK that people have lost faith in the possibility of an honest government who has the interests of their people in mind rather than their own power. Our ex-Prime Minister David Cameron has just given on the honours list an honour to his wife's hairdresser, which tells us something about, the way the government works. What I see in the UK is that in order for people to feel that the government might take their interests to heart and act out of their interests, we all have to sign a petition. So it's almost an assumption that the government won't do what we need it to do or what we want it to do unless we have a petition of 100,000 signatures. So seeing this world, it might be that it's down to communities working together on the basis of shared values and making choices about how we live and work, what we eat, what we buy, without waiting for governments to advise us or to make the right choices on our behalf. We'll need to support each other in a simple lifestyle that is in line with reality, that is in line with the way things are. Actually, I've been looking at this example of Detroit. I don't know if anyone's seen what's happening in Detroit. To summarise what's happened is the industry has left Detroit, is in a massive economic crisis. So this is, by the way, Detroit is a city in America. And it seems to me the government's completely failed the people there. And many houses have negative equity, and the government's just enabling them to be sold off for very little money, and the people who were living in those houses to just be thrown out. So in this economic crisis, what we see is actually the local community started to get together and in all the wasteland to plant gardens. I think the sort of minimum, the average distance to a supermarket or a food source for most people was about 3 miles. So they decided to grow food locally for local people. And it brought communities together. And as I was watching a little documentary on what's happening in Detroit, I was thinking, well, in a way, it's a vision of a garden in the wilderness, a different kind of garden in the wilderness, where communities come together and act together for the benefit of their society. For that to happen in Detroit, and in what I think will have to happen more generally, is to build those communities. We will need to have at their heart voices of compassion and sanity. I was very struck by a line in a poem by Yeats when there were troubles in Ireland, where he says, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Actually, we need to have people in the world who are the best, and who have conviction, and who have passionate intensity for the good of all. And I think they will need to be an example for other people. When Sangharakshita was giving his talk on Buddhism, world peace and nuclear war, he said that we had to build an example of impartiality and detachment, an example of love for humanity as a whole, an example for genuine devotion to the achievement of world peace by non-violent means. He said we have to be an example of sanity and compassion. We need an example that's a force for goodness in the world, which is more than the opposing forces of fear and competition and hatred. So how can Triratna respond to that, to respond to the future needs of the world? Well, I work in the ordination process, and what I see is actually a really excellent training for building, in Bhante's sense of the word, individuals. I think our ordination training covers both Dharma and Dharma practice, but it also covers people's personal issues and the way people communicate together. It enables people to become individuals, in Bhante's sense of the word, who are ethically responsible, aware and creative. And I think what's also very, very important in the ordination process, and I think really will help build an example to others, is the emphasis on right view. What I see now is that the world more than ever just needs basic right view. So when I think about how Triratna can contribute to this new world, I think I would like to see the order grow. And I'd like to see the order grow not by lowering its standards, but by having more confidence in what we have to offer, and seeing that what we have to offer is unique and important to the world. I think what makes it particularly unique is this combination of Dr. Ambedkar and Sangharakshita's thinking, and how those two sort of great men, if you like, their thoughts fuse together to create a new Buddhism for the new world. And this new Buddhism really works against individualism, which is an increasing tendency not only in the UK or Europe, but also all over the world. It really emphasises the social dimension of Buddhism itself, as Yashosagar was saying. So I think that we can build a stronger order where order members can take a lead in whatever field they're working in, wherever they are. And it's not just rhetoric. It's not just about people telling people what to do. We've talked about, yesterday we were talking a little bit about neo-colonialism, so we don't want to repeat that, just to make that clear. It's not about going around telling people what to do, but by living out of a positive example. We'll have to lead the way in new ways of living, different types of community living that's less individualistic, that's not just falling into the trap of more and more middle-class lives. We'll have to live more simply and together in communities and in teams of people. And it's not necessarily doing the same models as what we've done before in the past. Actually, I was thinking about Buddhist centres as community hubs, as places where people can get together and learn how to live in this new world. Actually, I was in Sheffield when our referendum happened and we voted to leave the EU, and we did talk about it, and we talked about what people voted, and we talked about why they voted like they voted, which was to both leave and remain. And we talked about what the Buddhist position on that might be. And it was an incredibly creative and vibrant time. Actually, I think the centres could do more of that. They could take more of a lead in people's lives and as centres of the community. I don't want to see our centres just becoming a sort of evening class centre where we've got some Buddhism on a Tuesday night and also some yoga and Tai Chi and other things going on. Actually, I'd like to see them really becoming a hub, a centre of community living. And we'll need to think about new ways of working, maybe being prepared to earn less and not necessarily doing the work that we want, but doing work that we can do together, that's sustainable. It's interesting that in Bhante's talk on Blueprint for a New World, what he emphasises is teams of committed people working together. And I think that's partly because it's only teams that will bind communities back into a whole. It's only teams of people that will bring people back together in the way that individualism drives people apart. And I've thought about that quite a lot, about why that might be true. And actually, when I was in the puja last night and just watching people making offerings, I was thinking, actually, it's quite simple. It's just love. If you've got a centre of people who sort of love each other, that centre is a centre of gravity. It's magnetic. You know, there's many people in this order I really, really love. I've known some of you for 20 years. That's more than half of my lifetime. And I share something that's very deep and precious in me with you. And if we can come together and work together, which I've had the pleasure to do with so many different people in the order, actually something really exciting can happen. You can see it happening, and you can see it attracting other people. It affects people. The love between us affects people. And if we work together as teams, we can act for the benefit of society as a whole. We can share with each other. I think there's much more that can be done about actually sharing the order's resources together, particularly money. So Dr. Ambedkar said that any social or political revolution is preceded by a religious revolution. And I think that's what we can offer people. Just as Yashosagar was saying, we can offer people a new way of living and working, a new way of being in the world, a new potential for the world and for the individual. Like those lines that we heard in the Dharmapada the other night. Happy indeed we live, friendly amidst the haters, content among the greedy, healthy among the sick. And I'm aware that this vision, in a funny kind of way, sounds pretty much like, Bhante's talk on nucleus of a new society and blueprint for a new world. In a way, there's nothing new here. I suppose that in thinking about the future, I get more of a sense of why we need what Bhante laid out and what genius it was that what he laid out all those years ago, and how we need that now more than ever and in the future more than ever. We're still such a young order. I think it's important to remember that. And what I see in the last few years is a real confidence in what we have to offer and who we are. And I think we could go much, much further with those original ideas. I'll just finish with a quote from Dr. Ambedkar. In a letter to Banti that he wrote to Banti, he said, "We must come out of our shell and be in the first rank of the fighting forces." I think we've got to lead the way, because if we don't lead the way, who will? Donald Trump? Theresa May? Modi? It's up to us. I think the future really is in our hand, and I think we've got something that the world needs.